Okay, so one of the things that we had been talking about a lot is the alphabet and different exercises and drills, and I mentioned doing the alphabet backwards as being a really great exercise that I like to do a lot. And so thought we would just train everybody exactly how to do that. And I've got to give credit where credit is due. I learned this from a guy named Michael J. Lavery, and he's at wholebraincoachingpower.com, and he really was where I got the idea that memorizing the alphabet backwards was not only something possible to do and learn within 4 minutes, but that it's just a great memory exercise and a great brain exercise. So basically how this works is ZYXWVUTSRQPONMLKJIHGFEDCBA. And you can take my word for that that was correct, or you can replay the video and do that sort of thing. But in principle, it should be that I'll just write it forwards to make sure that so yeah, ZYXWVUTSRQPONMLKJIHGFEDCBA. Is that correct? The basic principle of this all is that we can create a memory palace that will help us go through this. And you can do it also without a memory palace. It's up to you. But if you want to learn a very easy way to get started with memory palaces, I think that that's the best sort of solution. And so you just really want to play the math and figure out in the most familiar place that you have if you're a beginner, how that you can get a number of rooms to have 26 different stations in them. So I'm going to assume that you have that. And the first thing that you want to do is to create an image for the letter Z. Now, we can't really do this because the way I would do it with students and the way I have done it with students in a live class setting because of the video nature and not having interactivity. But what I would do is teach them how to build a memory palace, and then I would begin to teach them how to memorize individual words using zany imagery. And so basically what I would tell them to do is I want you to remember the following 10 words. And I would give them words like zebra, yellow, xylophone, maybe wood, and then no, that gotta be here. ZYXWVUT. Wood, and then maybe umbrella, and then train, and so forth. And I would give them these lists of words until they had 10. And then they would memorize them, and they would see like a giant zebra who is wearing a yellow raincoat, and then he was playing the xylophone, and all of this would be happening along the journey. And so once they had the first 10, I would say to them, tell me the first letter of each of those words that you've memorized. And they would be able to do that. It'd be a little bit rusty and a little bit tough at the beginning, but they would basically be able to go, okay, so zebra is Y, zebra is Z, yellow is Y, and they would go through it, and they would be able to say ZYXWVUT. And they would do this without knowing what they were doing. And I would ask them, do you know what you've just done? And students, we just made the first letter of every word. So then I'd get them to do another 10 and ask them to do that again. Very easy. And starting from the second 10, they would proceed through, and definitely with 98% of students would be able to list all those words that they've memorized simply and easily and quickly. And then they would be able to do all 20, and then I'd ask them the first letter of each word in reverse order. And then most students, at least some amount of the students in the class, will realize, aha, we're reciting the alphabet backwards. And so you're already there, and then you only need to add a few more stations to be able to do this. And it's just a great thing to prove to yourself that you can do these sorts of techniques and that you can succeed. I actually met one person that I was telling this about, this ability, and she said, well, can't everybody say the alphabet backwards? And I said, I don't know, try it. And she just whipped it off quite easily. So to some people out there, this might seem ridiculous. Of course I can memorize it, or I can recite the alphabet backwards. But to me, this was a completely foreign concept, and I really just have loved learning it. So I'll take you through actually the sort of story and images that I went through, and are very close to what I heard when it was given as an example with Michael Lavery. And it's basically a zebra with a yellow xylophone asks what to a man named Vut, V-U-T, who's a senior, S-R, in the who has a question for the post office box in northern Minnesota of Lake Kilimanjaro, where Jesus asked me, asked me about the human growth formula at the education department of the Central Brain Administration. Right? So all of those things are seen very vividly in the mind, following a journey, and everything is vivid, just exaggerated and strange. And there's certain mixture of things that can be seen and things that are abstract. So like the German asking what to a senior who has a question for the post office box. Well, senior, the idea of being a senior can be visual in terms of seeing an old person, but it also is conceptual, and question is conceptual as well. But a post office box can be seen. Northern Minnesota is kind of a concept. You don't actually see the map. You're just using the alphabet as a trigger, and Lake Kilimanjaro is likewise. But Jesus is seen, and he's seen addressing me to get the I, which is kind of, jury-rigging things a little bit to get ahead. Human growth formula, of course, is conceptually based as well, but it's capitalizing on the way that we abbreviate things, as is the education center, or the Department of the Central Brain Administration. So this is very, very simple to do, and it's for people who struggle with this, it's a great entry point in order to get started and get going and just have a fun challenge and something that you can just recite when you're feeling down or you need a little bit of a brain pep. Now the next level, if you want to take it a little bit further, as I mentioned before, is to sort of leapfrog from A to Z, B to Y, C to X, D to W, and so forth. And you can actually you can incorporate writing into this. So when I recite the alphabet backwards in my daily journaling and so forth, I often write it back, and then we'll do things like ZA and BY and so forth, and then do it backwards, and then try and do it from the center, and produce this material from the mind. And of course, when you're writing it down, you're assisting yourself, so you want to also try and do it without writing things down. But these are drills, and you can also do them with memorized numbers as well. If you memorize a certain number pattern, you can play the list forward and backwards. And this goes back to hacking or overcoming the Ebbinghaus decay effects, and this idea that memory, spatial location, or the order in which we learn things makes it much more, we process it more or we lose it quicker. This sort of overcomes that because we're playing these, we're sorting it in our mind in different ways, and we're seeing how things really can be reorganized and given spatial priority in different ways so that everything gets equal attention in terms of drills, and we're creating flexibility in our mind. It's really like doing different skipping drills or something like that with your mind. So if there are any questions about that, I can address those or carry forward. Did you want to ask your question from the last session? Okay, we're just going to pick up his question if you can give him the mic.
In the series Sherlock from BBC, Charles Augustus Magnuson, his name, he uses books as memory palaces. Can you actually do that, or do you have to have objects in a room?
Well, I think that's a very interesting sort of concept. One of the things that it's definitely something to experiment with, but I guess the idea would be, for example, that you had perhaps an imaginary bookcase, and on that imaginary bookcase, or even a real bookcase, you would, if it was a real bookcase, you would remove the books that are actually there and then have imaginary books, or use the books that are there and open them up, and a memory palace would be inside, or you could just use the book as you lay some key piece of information on there. So, and it's nothing that I've actually worked on yet, although I've thought about it before. Wouldn't it be neat for memorizing poetry if, instead of having the poetry organized alphabetically, I just had a bookshelf in my mind, and the poetry was just a book. A poem was a book. It was represented by a book. And to have a number of books of the poems that I want to have memorized, and I just need to mentally go there, pull one of those books off the shelf, and on the pages of a book, the pages themselves would become the memory palace journey, and that I'd be able to, by flipping the pages, go through. Now that kind of relates to that train effect that I talked about before, because it's a square, and using that page as a journey. You could just use the page itself as a kind of macro palace, or you could have some kind of floor plan that allows you to use it as a number of micro palaces. To the extent that this works and so forth, I think it would definitely work. It's just a matter of strategizing the approach and then actually getting down to giving it a try and experimenting with it. So I think it's a great question, and I want to see this sort of example in Sherlock. But is that addressing sort of what you're getting at? Yeah. So I hope you'll try it and report back, and I'm definitely going to try it myself. The only sort of thing that really prevents me from going too seriously into all of this is I like to have actual dedicated locations and to be able to have that reliance on a real place that I've been. So my first impulse would be to try this, would be to definitely have a book. I'd have the poems that I memorized in alphabetical order represented by these books, but inside of them I would then try to have a real memory palace. So if it was something from Leaves of Grass or something like that, well, Leaves of Grass would be in the general L section, or alphabetized in L, and then inside of that, let's see, do I have a friend that I can think of off the top of my head whose name starts with L, Leah, for instance, and use Leah's place, or something of that nature that's connected with that name. So if it was Ulysses by Tennyson, do I have a friend whose name? Well, yeah, I could use Uwe's house and that sort of thing. But have that actually stored in a bookcase. I think that's a really great organizational technique to capitalize upon. So were there any other questions that came in? No? Okay, so I'm just going to clear this off quickly while I recommend using this great exercise of the alphabet backwards. And we're going to go into a wrap-up before the bonus session on math memorization comes up. So, in conclusion, I want to share with you the ultimate student success secret and just wrap up what we've been doing with memory palaces. And there's an ultimate secret that is embedded in all of this that really comes from sharing a number of different points. To wrap up with the memory palaces, really, there's not a whole lot to say other than build them and get started using the techniques, the finer details that I've suggested, and fill those memory palaces with information as soon as possible. And then once you've had information placed in there, or you've gone through that step, rehearse the information and rehearse it as if it were a musical instrument, that you were, as if the memory palaces themselves are sheet music, and that by walking through them, you're performing the material like you would perform a musical instrument in order to actually produce sound. But in this case, it's not music, it's the memorized information that you're producing. And do it in a dedicated way, using the patterned recall rehearsal structures that you set for yourself, keeping O'Brien's rule of 5 in mind, keeping the Ebbinghaus theories in mind, and figure out for yourself what your information decay problems are, so to speak, in how that you can hack them. And there's not going to be any catch-all methodology for that, but the method that you create for yourself out of these ideas. And succeed and prosper would really be the summary of this whole thing. But I want to leave you with more ideas about what it means to succeed and prosper from my experiences as a student and from my thinking back to things that I could have done better and just other things that I've learned after graduating from my PhD, after having been in school for a very long time. I started in kindergarten. Actually, I was in preschool, which is before kindergarten, and I never left school ever once except for one time when I dropped out of high school for 6 months, and I never, other than that period, I never left school from preschool until I had a PhD. I was always in school. So I dare say that I have a bit of experience with student success just by virtue of how much time I spent there. And incidentally, when I did skip school for 6 months, it was because I was so bored with school. I was a little bit disappointed that I got put in a class where we weren't reading George Orwell's 1984. So I went and skipped school and read George Orwell's 1984 along with most of the encyclopedia. I skipped the stuff that wasn't interesting to me in the encyclopedia, but I was still going to school. It was just the school that I made for myself. And so some of these secrets come from these experiences. These success secrets, of course, have to do with the basic idea that being successful as a student is not just about developing your memory. There's just a lot more things that will go into this, and memory is a huge part of it, and we've talked a lot about memory and how to really get an advanced set of strategies for that, but developing memory is part of a field of character building necessities that really are part of success. So one of the first things that I would suggest is that you make sure as you're studying as a university student that you are really going for something that you are passionate about, that you really want to do. Now, as a young person, you may feel convinced that you're passionate about something, and that's great. Go with it, because you can't really make a mistake if you're really enjoying what you're doing. But if you feel that you're being pressured and you're not there because you don't want to be, but you have the myth that there's a job on the other side, or you have the feeling that you need to have a particular job when you get to the other side because of some sort of parental or familial obligations or obligations that you've put upon yourself, really, really examine those things, because you're creating a prison around yourself if you are studying things that you're not passionate about, that you're not deeply interested in, and that aren't really giving you the feeling that you're becoming a better person every single day by adding that information to your head. That doesn't mean that by being passionate, all of that information is going to be super easy to learn or that you're not going to have trouble with it, but being passionate will get you over those humps almost every time. And I've put here the idea that you should avoid slave's luck. And what is slave's luck? Well, slave's luck is the condition of having worked really, really hard to get something and only find out that you didn't want it at all in the first place, and it's making you miserable. So you've become a slave. You've become a lucky slave. You went through all this training, you got into your profession, and now you just don't like it at all, and that's the idea of slave's luck. So a lot of people get caught in that trap, and I was fortunate to not really be a part of that. I was always engineering my program that I was going through, whether it was the English program or the media and communication studies program or the humanities program, so that it fit my needs and suited what I was interested in, so that when challenges came during times when I couldn't find work as a professor, I was still deeply satisfied by what I had done. I had climbed Mount Everest for its own sake and got all this knowledge because I wanted it. And certainly there's disappointments in not being able to find a job if that ever happens in your profession and in your passion, but I've been equipped with things that make not having a job really not a big deal because of having studied my passion and being able to know how to cultivate energy and interest, that even when the tough gets going, I'm able to respond to that and still survive and actually flourish. And so I don't have slave's luck. I have not landed in a position that I don't like and don't feel passionate about, and I'm deeply grateful about that. And some of that has to do with what's coming up next. 80-20 principle, you hear this a lot. It's also known as the pair 2 principle. And the idea is that 20% of what you do accounts for the greatest majority of your results. They use this sort of clean numbers, 20-80. And I've always sort of found this an interesting principle. It's kind of like a virus right now, or it's gone viral in a big way. One of the things that you want to be able to do with it is identify what 20% of your activities are producing the greater amount of your results, and what amount of your activities are not producing any results at all, and so that you can focus on those things that are doing great things for you. Now, that's a really great principle to follow, but you also want to do the opposite, which is to think about what 20% of things are you doing that give you the most joy, regardless of the outcome that you're getting from them. It doesn't always have to be about productivity, you know. We often think of the 80-20 principle in terms of productivity and so forth, but it can also be about pleasure and joy and things that are really deeply edifying and so forth. And so I like to flip it on its head and think about what are the 80% of things that I'm doing that cause me deep anxiety that I could be filling with fun. So, for instance, Eckhart Tolle talks about in The Power of Now, he's like, we spend so much of our time stressing out when we think, oh, I'm procrastinating and I wish I was doing something productive and so forth. And his biggest suggestion is, I think a brilliant one, is if you're procrastinating, you might as well enjoy it instead of stressing out about it. So I think that that's a really powerful piece of advice. And when I've noticed that I'm procrastinating and I'm not doing anything, I've tried to focus on that. And it really is a wonderful way of enjoying not working. And it really actually inspires getting back to work in a much quicker way because you're not fighting. It's, again, this Bruce Lee sort of thing, no self, no enemy. And so that's a piece of advice I would give is, yes, definitely think about the productivity elements of the 80-20 principle, but also think about how you can think about it in terms of the things that are giving you pleasure and making sure that you're cutting out any anxiety that you could be actually enjoying when you're procrastinating and so forth. The next thing is about measuring and the idea, again, that what we measure improves and so forth. So you want to think about where you are at any particular moment, such as today, and compare it with where you want to be so that you can actually create a plan for getting there. However, there's a kind of caveat, again, with this sort of thing, because the future is always coming. Tomorrow is always around the corner, and no matter how much we plan, as Robbie Burns said, the plans of mice and men gang afterglay, which means they often go awry and they often go differently than we want them to. So as we are measuring where we are and thinking about where we want to be, we also have to cultivate a certain form of relaxation about it and not get too hung up on the outcome. We always want to be able to allow for surprises, to adjust the plan, go with the flow, go with the blows, and just ongoing analysis. And I've been really influenced by someone who runs Zen Habits, which is a blog. His name's Leo Babuata, and he talks about this a lot, about how we just destroy so much of what we're doing at the present moment because we've hinged it to a future outcome when the future's coming no matter what. And so now is the time to enjoy it and not to get too stressed out about the outcome because the outcome is probably never going to look like what you intended it to anyway. So really being open to the things that are coming is a huge success secret, and things will come, even though most university programs are very well structured and you can sort of rely on what's going to come in the next 4 years or so as you're going through a degree. But nonetheless, be flexible because policies may change, your interests may change. You might be listening to people like me who are saying follow your passion, and it might click and you say, wow, this is the wrong place for me, I really need to go and do something else. That said, there's benefits for sticking through things that you've committed to and seeing them through to the end. So yeah, there's all kinds of things, different ideas every day. So always being flexible to the future and allowing it to happen and also measuring where you are. Another thing that I think is really, really important is the idea of role models. And one of the things that people I've encountered, and I've done it myself, the mistakes that I've made is to role model strategies that people are using. And the problem with that is it depends on the strategy, of course, but the problem with modeling strategies is that, Quentin Tarantino working in a video store and being really passionate about movies so that he's denying, other things that he could be doing to make a greater income so that he can ultimately become a great film director and a screenwriter. That doesn't mean that you have to go work at a video store so that you're funding your screenwriting habits, because that's not the recipe. That's the technique or the strategy that he followed, and that led him to becoming the director, world-famed and world-renowned, by virtue of just the choices that he made in that moment. But it's not something to be modeled. It's not a strategy to be modeled. Rather, the mindset of, I have value to offer to Hollywood or to whatever field you're in, and just saying, I'm going to get it out there one way or the other, knowing that you're going to need to roll with the punches and finding ways that will satisfy you for having gotten it out there in the ways that you want to, and always pushing yourself, challenging yourself, but again, as a mindset sort of thing. So look at people for how they thought and how they brought their energy to things. And, of course, keep their strategies in mind, but don't feel that those are the things to model. much more important is to think about what the thinking is behind how they came up with the strategies. And so, in other words, think about what they did. And then that enables you to go into the past and think about things that people from history did. And you can't possibly use a lot of their strategies. Like, you can't run around like Benjamin Franklin did doing certain experiments, because that's just not really relevant anymore. But you can certainly model the mindset. Now, there's something called the 50-20 minute principle, which can easily be the 40-10 minute principle or the 35 minute principle. The idea here is that you set a parameter for how long you're going to focus, and then you set a parameter for how long you're going to rest. And so I really like the idea of setting a clock for 50 minutes and focusing, and then taking a break for 20 minutes. And this is one of the hardest things to develop discipline around, because often it's around the 45-minute mark that I really get going. But Hemingway, of course, always said the best time to stop writing is when you know you have something to write tomorrow. And it's sort of a thing here where even though you might be feeling, wow, I'm onto something, then that's often the time to break, because you can come back to it fresh and have something to do. Because they do say that it can take 10 to 15 minutes to get back into an activity, if not longer, when you've broken from it. But if you quit at a time when you know exactly what you're going to do next, you can take that break and come in on a high note and just get started. These are not, universally true principles, but it's something to keep in mind and experiment with for what works with you. And the 50-20 thing has always worked for me. I'm using something now that I would recommend to you called focusatwill.com, and it's a music program that you can use to track your productivity in combination with the program playing particular music to you. And you can choose the kind of music. I always have it on classical, and I set it so that it stops me at 50 minutes. The music stops at 50 minutes, along with a little sort of alarm. And then it asks me, how productive do I think that I felt that I was in that time? And you give a little rating, 70%, 80%, 90%, or whatever the case may be. And it starts to choose music based on how you rate your productivity. And it's really amazing. You just have to try it. So that's focusatwill.com. And the other thing about tracking your results and so forth that I have done to great effect is to write in a notebook exactly what you're doing. So a lot of people write to-do lists, which is great. It helps you structure your time. But you can track your time in real time very simply by putting, let's just say I start doing a task at 2:30, and then I say what that is. So I could say email, and then I write an arrow, and then I say, so to 1500 or so, to 3 o'clock. And then I stop. And then I would put this, and then I would say break. And let's say I have a 15-minute break. When I'm done the break, it would be 15:15. And then go to the next thing. And what that enables is it enables a lot of things. It's tremendously powerful, because while you're tracking this, you're actually paying attention to what you're doing. And if you follow it in a disciplined way, you say, oh, I really want to check email. And then you look and you have this in front of you on a notebook or however you want to write. And you think, wow, I want to check my email again already? I just checked it. I was working on it and answering emails for half an hour. So you go on to the next task, and you have a good sense of what you're doing and how much time you should be spending on things. And it's just really tremendously powerful. And then at the end of the day, when you have this list of everything that you've done, you will, wow, that day was really well used. And you actually can see it because you tracked it in real time. And I found that very, very powerful. And people ask me all the time, how do you do all this stuff every day? You answer, dozens of questions every week, and it's because I track it. I know exactly how much time I've spent on a day, and it's typically 2 to 3 to 4 hours of email every day that I do. And then let's say I take a break, and then 15:15 comes, and I know that I need to edit a particular book or a novel or something, and I do that until, let's say, 15:45, and then it's time for some bass lessons, so I would write down bass, and then I would start to play bass. And I would really, really make sure that I don't check email while I'm playing bass, because I used to do that at a certain time, but just play bass, and then do that into a particular thing, and then it's time to get back to work, like writing a new book and so forth. And then I see at the end of the day, that was a day where I served myself, and I served others, and I served just my goals. So this is something that I would suggest. And you can do it into 50, 20-minute principle or do multiple things within that 50 minutes, but that's the general sort of guideline and something to keep in mind. The next thing that I wanted to talk about, and it's something you can look up on Google, it's a Vimeo video, and that's Dean Jackson's 50-minute focus finder. And this 50, 20-minute thing I sort of got from him. And Dean Jackson's like a marketing wizard, and he has an amazing video, which I actually think is 50 minutes long, to go with the theme of the 50-minute focus finder. And one of the things that he talks about is sitting down before you do anything and just writing everything off the top of your head, everything that you have there, and just getting a brain gush going. And that's a very powerful thing to do. But another thing that I found really, really striking about his activity is the use of envelopes. And so he'll often have 3 projects that he's working on at a time, and on a wall he'll have envelope with the number 1 written on it, and an envelope with the number 2, and an envelope with the number 3. And those are the only things he's going to work on in that day. And there's 50 minutes for this, there's 50 minutes for that, and there's 50 minutes for number 3. And they're just stuck on the wall. They'd actually be stuck this way with the flap open. And inside of them would be, in our case, index cards. And we would say, now is time to work on envelope number 1, and we would pull out whatever index cards we had stored in there, and we would do the things that we want to do with those index cards. For instance, memorize the material that's on them. And it's just a very elegant and neat way to have things organized. You know where it is, you know where to find it, you know how to get started because you're using a 50-minute principle or 45-minute principle and so forth, and you're tracking your time, and that is organized in that place for you to go and work on. And I learned a lot from that video that he put out, and I've implemented it, and it's just golden. It's an amazing, amazing technique. Yep.
150 minutes on being productive, on doing work?
Well, I think that, yeah, it's a great question, and really it behooves everybody to go and watch that video in order to see exactly what he's doing. But he does belong to that sort of class of people, 4-hour work week people, who are thinking about how can we get the most productivity out of our time in order to get the most results. And so the idea that he's working for only 50 minutes a day is potential on particular days, or 3 sessions of 50 minutes is totally possible, and you can see why that is possible. It's because of using constraints and to actually package things into energy, and actually beforehand putting some thought into what those activities are going to be. And you know, another thing that these people talk about that I've heard associated with Dean Jackson is having the techniques organized into particular value systems. So, for instance, I've heard it talked about having gold coin activities, silver coin activities, and bronze coin activities. And other people talk about rating different activities in different ways so that you're actually spending particular days on particular activities. So it would be like the gold coin activities at the beginning of the week when you're feeling the most motivated, or the middle of the week when you're feeling most motivated, and the silver coin techniques or activities at the beginning of the week, or however you want to arrange it, and then actually having entire days that are free, and they're free days for actually just doing none of this work. But you only earn those free days by having a strategy for how you're going to work, when you're going to work, how you're going to track what you're doing, and how you're going to analyze the activities in order to get the maximum benefit from it. So I don't know the extent to exactly how that he applies his own principle, but it's a great video because he takes you into his office and he lets you actually see these envelopes hanging on the wall. And I've tried it. I don't have any pictures of it, unfortunately, but if I had pictures and I hadn't gotten rid of a lot of my research when I moved around and decided to go on tour with a heavy metal band and had to downsize a lot of stuff, I had many, many envelopes, and I would pick days and actually select the ones that I was going to work on, and this is after I had all of the index cards organized from the floor. They were then reorganized into envelopes and put on walls, and just it's just information control in order to control myself. And a lot of this came out of just having a crazy mind that is all over the place with whatever conditions that one has to take pills for and so on, and just not accepting that as a barrier, not accepting this wild imaginative leaps of things going here, there, and the other place, and developing external discipline using objects as simple as index cards, envelopes, and so forth to give elegance and strategy and actual clear ways of moving forward instead of just random. And I don't think that my particular, ADD-esque brain really makes it any different than the other chaotic ways that other people live. But as a student, we rely upon ourselves to bring discipline. No one comes and says, here's how you organize your life and so forth. The basic challenge of university is really nothing to do with grades, the grades that you get or the degree that you get at the end. The basic test that you're passing is, can you pass the test? Can you set yourself up, your life, organize your way of being to such an extent that you're able to master those activities to get that outcome? So the real test is the level to which that you organize yourself and bring yourself to that level of completion. That's the real test, and I think that these things are very good ways of doing that. Was there another question?
Not at the moment, but I have a question myself. I mean, you the tracking thing, yeah, it can become a little bit overwhelming. How do you do that? Are you using an app on your smartphone, or are you just writing it down on your notebook?
Just writing it down in my notebook.
Okay.
My notebook is over there, but we can take a shot.
Right.
Put it up on the sales page or whatever.
Got it.
But I actually find that the point is to write it down, not to rely on apps. My real feeling is that the app things is great. I'm not anti-technology. I'm not some weird guy who thinks that technology is destroying our capacity to think and all that stuff. I love it. But there is a place for actually integrating your life with your hands and actual material things like lead and pencils and that sort of stuff. And it's just faster. It takes time to open my iPhone, to find the plain text app, to wait for it to come up, to then start typing, to correct what I've typed, to then turn it down and so forth. That takes so much time. Whereas a notebook, it's already open. I have the pencil laid over it so that it stays open. It says right in front of me beside my keyboard, 15:13 or 15:15 or whatever. I actually do the exact minute, and then I work until that I do the next thing. And it's not overwhelming. Actually, what's overwhelming is to lose entire days just randomly going from thing to thing and going to the end of the day and going, where did the time go? What did I do? Not even being able to really piece together a picture of the day. That, to me, is overwhelming. And the fact of the matter is, in life, if you're not willing to do this kind of thing to yourself, then somebody else will gladly do it for you, and that's called a job. So I think that one of the ways you can really develop this discipline is to, do this sort of thing. And if you find it personally overwhelming, then that's okay. I would never judge anybody. But for me, I'm just a wild child, and if I don't do this kind of stuff, then I really do have this terrible feeling at the end of the day, what happened today? Why is it 10 p.m.? And I have no idea what I did today. I mean, I have a general idea, of course, but no, I think that this helps combat overwhelm.
I have another personal question to Dean Jackson's methodology in terms of constraints and so forth. And there is another psychological concept. It's called grit. Yeah, and some research has been done lately on grit, and it basically says that in order to, grit seems to be the predictor for student success, right? Or the ability to really to be resilient and work on a problem no matter what, right? And I kind of feel that, if you have the constraint, okay, I'm only working like 2 hours, even though I'm working with real focus on that, it happens that I'm stuck, right? Especially when you're doing math or when you're coding. which requires complex problem-solving skills. How do you reconcile the concept from Jackson with grit?
Well, I mean, it really comes back to this thing about knowing what your desired outcome is and being flexible. There's not really much to be gained by banging your head against the wall. There's the German word Ausnahme, the exception, right? But the thing is your life going to be a life of exceptions, or is it going to be that you're exceptional? And you really need to balance that. I think that, coding is challenging, but if you are using grit, so to speak, to just force yourself through something and having this level of discipline that breaks you and really doesn't give you any joy, then what's the point? I think that for Dean Jackson, who's sharing this stuff, he's doing it because he's talking about how he manages to get himself to get through stuff that he loves, but still get over that challenge of, even though you love something, like I was saying before, I love to play bass guitar, but you still have to actually incorporate it. You still have to schedule it. You still have to actually pick up the bass and still do it. So he is talking about things that he loves to do. So if it's coding, really it doesn't matter how complex it is. If it's something you want to do, it doesn't matter if you really spend 2 hours without taking a break and walking away and coming back to it. These are general guidelines. These are ways of getting in there. However, what I would say is that if you're doing something complex, you don't have focus on it, but you still want to stick to the 50 minutes and so forth, try and find a surrounding task. Try to find something that's related to it. So, for instance, if I were working on a complex mathematical problem, let's say, and I just wasn't getting it, the abstract stuff, I would then go, well, what's the history of this problem? And I go on maybe Wikipedia, even though it's a controversial resource, or I might go look at some dissertations about math, and I would stay in that genre, stay in that field, and try to use up that 50 minutes on that topic, and then find my freshness and find my recharge inside of the field. So I'm not going too far away, but I'm giving myself a break, keeping my mind on it, and then maybe a solution comes inside of that. But we all know the phenomena of going away from something and then having it come bam later because we've taken that break. So it's again that thing about being flexible and having the guidelines, but still trying to stick with the program at the same time. So I would agree that a little bit of grit can go a long way.
Alrighty. New question just came in from Alessandro. He has following problem. He says if he's trying to remember, if he's remembering only images that he stored in the station, he's not able to decode the idea. So he's struggling with it. Do you know what he's doing wrong?
Well, I don't know in particular what is going wrong here, but it seems that the material is not well, that's exactly what he said. The material is not helping him decode the actual target information. And so what that suggests is that the actual images and the actions are not closely hinged enough to the meaning of the target material. And in the case of foreign language vocabulary, the sound. So typically what you want things to do is to recall both the meaning and the sound of things, or these images. You want them to recall the multiple pieces of information at the same time. So if you're, is he saying what exactly he's studying?
No, maybe, Alessandro, if you are watching us right now, which I assume, then please tell us what you're exactly studying at the moment, all right?
I'll keep addressing this, but in general, if it was foreign language vocabulary or poetry in your own mother tongue, you want to actually have a direct link between recalling the sound and the meaning at the same time. So that imagery should do both at the same time, so that you're not only increasing the chances, but you're having that economy of means, so that it's actually doing that work. It really brings nothing if you just, here's a great picture of a volcano shooting out 1,000 Al Pacinos who are, slicing at each other with swords, and that isn't connected to anything. I mean, it's great that you can recall that, but you want it to have meaning. So, maybe the swords need to be changed to something that's much more integrated in that topic, or it needs to be not a volcano, but something that's more deeply integrated in that topic. the more you can actually use the material on a visual level that's linked and the actions in a way that's linked, the more success you're going to get. And I think that it would be really great if Alessandro sticks around for the presentation with math with Robert, because Robert is demonstrating how he has managed to use very, very concrete images to, in very, very direct and very usable ways, recall formulas, mathematical formulas. And it's really fascinating what he talks about and how he describes it. And he's definitely, in a different way than I would approach it, being able to recall what those formulas are, and those can then be used to calculate things.
Right. Alessandro just answered the question. He's studying both Chinese language and Chinese philosophy.
Okay, so that's an issue of actual words that have meaning based on sound structures and spelling, and then the other thing would be concepts. And these are sort of things that actually lend to one another. And I don't know if he's studying Chinese philosophy in Chinese at the same time, or he's just studying Chinese and then the philosophy in English. But
yeah, good question. I don't know.
In some sense, it's just good to know the general area. But the thing would be, there's a specific character to this information that needs to be translated or transcoded into specific images that enable that recall. So again, play around with it. Maybe you're not making it exaggerated enough. Maybe you're not making the colors vivid enough, or maybe you're just not making a literal enough association in order to recall that material, or maybe you're not making it loose enough, the opposite of literal, which would be more figurative or more fantasy based. You just got to play with it until that you get the results that you want, but always keeping in mind these key strategies, and then thinking about your intentions. What do you want to do with this information? What's your personal, what stresses are you under? Are you doing it for the right reasons and so forth? I mean, that shouldn't really actually play in terms of the hard science of this technique, but it may be influencing it. And just work at it, and email me with exactly what you're trying to do, and don't just say come up with examples for me, which is what happens quite a bit, but actually show me what examples you've come up with, and then maybe I can help you jury rig it to be more tight and give a little bit of email coaching that way, because I'm very happy to do that. But seeing what you've already done, and often the process of describing it to someone else will help you fine-tune it and figure out better ways. Because if you don't write down your associative imagery sometimes, then you can't see how it would be better, because it's totally contained in your mind, which is your goal ultimately, to be able to have it contained in your mind. But I still, as good as I've gotten with these techniques when I want to use them, I still go through that step to write them down when I seriously want to memorize this stuff for the long haul, because I often see chinks in the armor by writing it down and going, yeah, that needs to be strengthened a little bit, or I haven't really gotten that tight enough. The economy of means isn't there. So it's certainly worth writing down, and if he hasn't done that, then by describing it to me or describing it to somebody else, he may get that insight that he needs just by going through that step.